topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, Orlando. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. You know, this is the last Thursday of the month. That means K. Bender Rimbaum, one of the largest law firms, community association law firms in the state of Florida. And my buddy's on today. It's just something about his personality and my personality. And he had, well, I'm just going to introduce him a little bit different than we have in the past. It's now board certified Alan Swartzide. Good afternoon, Alan.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You know, we want to someone sent me a letter a couple weeks ago saying, congratulate Alan. We know he's a board certified attorney now in community association law. And I said, I'll do it on air. They got a kick out of that. But hey, we're really proud of you. You deserve it. I love the way you explain things. And, you know, Kay Bender, you're both so lucky to have each other. And we're just glad to have you on the show.
I appreciate it. I could not agree more. I found a perfect home, and hopefully the guys feel the same about me. I haven't heard anything negative yet, and I know them well enough to know that if there was a problem, I'd found out pretty quickly. So,
yes.
But thank you for the congratulations. It is, you know, a big deal to me, and it was one of those things that I just thought, you know what, it's time to go for it, and you know, appreciate the support of the firm and people like you. A lot of work. Yeah, it was. You know, it's almost like taking a mini bar exam, but very specific subject matter. So it was a lot, and a lot of it was, you know, things that I don't necessarily deal with on a daily basis, even though community association law is my proverbial bread and butter. So it was a lot of effort, but I'll leave it at that because I want to get to the questions. But Steve, I do appreciate you pointing it out. It's a big deal.
Well, I got it. First of all, I can't believe how many new listeners and viewers we're getting. Tell people about K. Bender Rimbaum. Sure.
Well, again, as you mentioned, we're a community association law firm. That's all we do. Been around since the 90s. We've got 21 attorneys spread among 4 offices. Mine's in Orlando, but we've also got Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens in Tampa, office available by appointment in Miami as well. 9 of our attorneys, I believe, are board certified, just like I am in this area of law. Another one board certified in construction. So if there's anything your community association needs, I like to think we're the right people to reach out to if you don't already have counsel you're happy with.
I got to tell you, there's so many great things that K. Bender Rimbaum does, but I think one of the greatest things is the teaching aspect of it. You all are always putting on classes that are free.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. I just think, and I know my partners agree, education is extremely important, whether that's educating our clients on what they should and shouldn't do, or educating the public on what can happen when they don't follow the covenants, or, you know, whether they really have a claim that they should be bringing against an association, although that generally wouldn't be us helping out with it. But bottom line, you know, the educational piece of what we do, it's not just a marketing ploy. We really do find it important for people in the state of Florida to understand what they can and can't do with respect to community associations.
Hey, Alan, now more than ever, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've seen some of the laws that have come into place, and I would say I won't share my opinion on them, but I think you know better by now. I don't like most of them because I don't like the concept of taking volunteers and acting as though a 4-hour class or a 2-hour class is sufficient to justify saying that they should know what they're supposed to do well enough to criminalize behavior if they don't comply, which is what the legislature's done in a couple instances this year. So, yeah, I mean, I think the education is important, especially for the board of directors. I like that was one of the changes that did come through this year, is that whether you're in an HOA or a condo, you have an educational requirement. It's different from HOA to condo. It's different based on the size of an HOA, but there is a requirement that you actually take some kind of educational program. And I think that was a great change that the legislature made. Again, not so thrilled with some of the others, but we'll see how they play out.
Alan, I think this is probably going to be the biggest topic we'll discuss today, because for some reason people, and that's fine, we don't have a problem on. We get so many letters asking us about, the new laws and everything. But besides that, I want you to explain to people, because there's a lot of people who are really upset with the board because of the cost of living in a condo. But it's not the board's fault, though.
No, I mean, most of the time it's not. I'll acknowledge sometimes the board screws up and it costs more, but that's usually when you haven't done maintenance and now you've waited 5 years and the cost is exponentially higher than it would have been if you just got the situation handled up front, because there's further deterioration because of inflation, et cetera. But back to your original question, and this isn't just condos, it's HOAs as well. And that's, in my experience, unless you're in a coastal area or you're in like the city of Orlando, you're mostly seeing HOAs in Central Florida, and both of them are impacted both by the cost of insurance, which impacts everyone across the state. I keep being told that cost is going to go down and that the legislation that passed last year is going to help with it. Still haven't seen it happen for a single one of my communities that I work with. But that's not something the association has any control over, or the board, more importantly for this discussion, has any control over what that costs. That cost is going to go into your assessments and is going to result in an increase. And then the other thing that is outside of the board's control are all of these milestone inspection reports, structural integrity reserve studies, and the related structural integrity reserves, which were never something that the association had to do before a couple of years ago. And now the budgets are starting to come in that actually require them. And so when you have, I think it's 12 categories of specific items that you never had to put away money for before, you just had to have the money available when the work was needed, or more likely levy a special assessment when the work was needed. Now that money has to be set aside in a reserve account, whether it's a pooled reserve or a straight line reserve, either way, you have to have the money accessible and available when that change is going to need to happen, whether it's a repair or replacement of one of these structural items. This is money you never had to put away before. So between the cost of getting the studies done, which can be tens of thousands of dollars in some instances, and the actual reserves being put away, the board doesn't have a choice but to do these things. And frankly, especially with a lot of the criminalization of not complying with certain restrictions, it's not necessarily regarding the reserves, but it's about a lot of other things. Your board doesn't have a choice but to up the assessments by the amounts that it's really going to cost. I mean, here's what your budget is. It's the board's estimate of what it really will take to properly operate and maintain your community to the extent stated in your governing documents and the Florida statutes. Now, the members can propose an alternative budget if they're not happy with it, but the board has what's called a fiduciary responsibility to adopt and propose an appropriate budget. If you don't like that budget, which I understand, you as a group of members can propose an alternative budget and a majority of the members can vote. You won't be able to waive certain structural integrity reserves, but you can reduce some of the other amounts that are in the budget. The problem there is that you're basically guaranteeing that your community is not going to be maintained properly. So you can either have a building that deteriorates and frankly looks like crap, or you can have your buildings being maintained, your landscaping hopefully being maintained, all of the other accommodations that you've got within your condo or within your HOA being properly taken care of, or you can choose to pay a little bit less. I mean, my response to the people that are blaming the board for a lot of this stuff is you need to actually take a class on what the legislative changes have been over the last 3 years. And then maybe you'll understand that the board has zero choice but to pay for proper insurance, whatever proper means under the context. I think the actual legal term that's used in the statute is an appropriate amount of insurance. But whatever it is, it's the association has to properly insure all of the common elements, and insure everything else. The directors and officers are entitled to be insured. And then you've got these new reserves that are costing tens of thousands of dollars, and in some instances, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for the association to make sure that you've got the money when it's needed. And you can blame the legislature for the most part for that. And I'm not saying it's absolutely the wrong decision to require these, but the bottom line is it makes more sense, in my opinion, to require the milestone inspections, make sure that the building's safe, and if it's not safe, make sure that the association takes care of it, rather than putting a bunch of money away in a structural integrity reserve that's going to be used in 23 years that the members are required to pay, and frankly might have moved out, or you'll excuse me, but we're in Florida and a lot of these are retirement communities, may have passed on before that money's ever used. But we don't get that choice because that's what the legislature says that the association has to do.
Alan, was this kind of kicking the can down the road?
Well, this is actually the opposite of kicking the can down the road. The legislature apparently believes that the Surfside building collapse, as much of a tragedy as it was, could have been prevented if that particular association had put the money aside in reserves to do the work that was needed. Now that we
That's
found
what I'm talking
out
about, the reserve, that the money was not put away.
Right. And that's certainly problematic that the association chose to kick the can down the road, like you're suggesting, for several years before this building collapsed. But what the legislators, I think, might be ignoring is that my understanding is the studies that were actually done by qualified individuals who don't include me, but the studies that were done showed that this was a construction defect, not a lack of reserves that caused this issue. Now, yes, having the reserves to make the repairs might have changed the situation, but I don't recall offhand whether the specific structural defect in question was actually one of the things that they would have reserved money for in the first place. It probably would have been that if they found out about the problem, they should have gotten it fixed. I believe, if I recall correctly, it was a problem with the construction of the pool on the top of the building. That's not something you reserve for except the roof itself.
Right.
So having these reserves in place, I don't know that it would have helped in this situation, but I won't belabor the point. Bottom line, my opinion is these structural integrity reserves are going to cause problems for a lot of communities, and specifically the members who have to pay for them. And I don't know that the legislature, especially given the recent letter that was issued by one legislator in particular, that there's not a need for a special session to discuss this issue at this time. All we can say at this point is we hope that this problem gets fixed in the next legislative year, because it doesn't appear that any changes are going to be made until next year, as of right now.
What are your clients? I'm sure your phones are ringing off the wall. What are your clients asking you?
How do we fund these reserves? That's the biggest question I'm getting. How do we actually find the money? Because like you're saying, Steve, our members can't afford it.
Right.
If you increase their assessments, some instances over the last 2-3 years, it went from $200 a month up to $1,500 a month. And people have budgets, as crazy as that may sound to some of these legislators. How do we fund this and not put our members in the poorhouse? And sometimes that's through special assessments that are payable over time. Sometimes that's through loans. What I'd love to see is a clear provision in the statute that says that the association can fund this however it needs to, as long as it's not some, a loan shark, basically. Any legal means the association can use it in lieu of increasing assessments by, 10 to 20 times what they were 2-3 years ago. But that's the biggest question I'm getting, Steve, is how do our members actually afford this stuff? And how does the association as a corporation afford it, unless we just hike up the assessments and then the members complain about the assessment hike?
There's, again, we're getting so many emails and a lot of text messages, and people are concerned about. You and I both know of a property that is putting up a new sign out front, very expensive sign. And the question is why spend, first of all, that kind of money when it's already tight? But then you told me it's a very competitive market, though, when it comes to living, and you got to keep up with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is a country club community that we're talking about. And anytime you're talking about, frankly, any type of community, whether it's a condo, an HOA, you have to keep your property values up. You've got to compete with all the other local clubs. And, this one's in South Florida. There are probably 15 others within a 10-mile radius. And as a result, you've got a lot of competition. And if you're sitting there with a sign and an external appearance and golf courses that are, decades old, you're not really competing and you don't have a modern look. This one in particular, they modernized the look of everything, because I was there a couple weeks ago, and they've modernized the entire community, and it looks phenomenal. And I can understand someone questioning why that wouldn't be done at this particular time.
Yes.
But it's done at this time because it has to happen at some time. The fact that we're in a troubling economy here in the state of Florida to some extent, and the fact that there are additional expenses coming up that people don't know how to account for, doesn't change the fact that you stop being competitive when your sign is 20 years old, your golf course is 20 years old, and you look like a club that existed in the 1990s or early 2000s. And, I would say the same thing about law firms. I mean, I've worked with firms that you walk into their office, you feel like you're in the 80s. And, the bottom line is it's hard to stay competitive when people view you as antiquated, older. Yes. And that's not the view that a golf club wants. That's not the view that our firm wants. We take a more modern approach, and as a result, we have a modern look. And, the goal is to make sure that you're remaining competitive, and you can't do that with a 1990s look.
You brought up before about classes, certification. One of our first questions was,
of course.
Is it true for the certification now is 4 hours?
For condos, yes. For HOAs, it's still the standard 2 to 3 hour class. And I know that a couple people have asked me to clarify who is authorized to teach this class. For the condos in particular, DBPR is offering it. They've offered, I believe, one already and another one that's coming down the pike, but registration for that one is completely full from what I understand. We're also now authorized again, because we were authorized before, then DBPR put out something saying anyone that's authorized can't teach it except for basically the elective credits that condo boards need. They've now clarified that we're authorized to teach it for the actual board certification credit. And I believe there may be one or two other firms that have gotten that same recertification, so to speak. So we're authorized to teach it. We do have one coming up in September. I'd be surprised if we don't teach another in October, given the amount of people that now need to take this on a semi-urgent basis. So yeah, we are authorized to teach it. It is 4 hours long for condos. And don't forget, Just because you have that 4-hour class doesn't mean you're done for the next 7 years in a condo once you take it. It means that you're done with that particular class for 7 years, and the 6 years in the interim, you still have a 1-hour credit requirement. So you're still going to have to do education every year. And then in HOAs, it's a different requirement. It's every 4 years to take the class. And my buddy Jeff Solomon just texted me, our September class is full. Our October 2nd one is now open for registration. So anyone that needs that class, get in now, because apparently I didn't even know we had the ability to reach capacity on a Zoom webinar, but apparently that is a possibility. It's the first time I've seen it happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens yet again on for October 2nd. So thank you, Jeff, for clarifying that we've got another class coming up. But that'll be October 2nd. So you can go to our website, kvrlegal.com, under the calendar and register right from the website. But if you're in an HOA, that requirement's going to be every 4 years. And depending on your size, if you're under 2,500 lots, you've got a 4-hour a year education requirement. If you're over 2,500 or at 2,500 lots, you're having an 8-hour per year education requirement. We're working on figuring out whether we can just set up a day and just say, hey, you want to show up for one day? You'll be done for the year. Or if we're going to just teach separate classes like we usually do. But we'll figure that out at some point, just like the DBPR will. But I will point out what's been told to me, because I didn't attend the DBPR's class. I didn't want to waste the spot when someone actually needs the class. My understanding is that DBPR basically read the materials almost verbatim. I don't know how helpful that is beyond just you can read them yourself. But it'll get you the certification. If you want to be educated, you might want to attend our class instead. So I'm not trying to detract from DBPR's attendance, but I will say if you're looking for explanations, legal explanations of the issues involved and not just here's the issue, you might want to consider attending our class either instead or as well. Because keep in mind, different people present these classes in a different way. I will never say you shouldn't attend someone else's class. What I'll say is if you're going to attend theirs, you should also attend ours. Because there's different pieces that you'll get from each class.
I'm going to get this question, and I'd like to go to since we're talking classes, your schedule.
Sure.
Regarding HOA board meetings.
Okay.
If a board meeting is done by Zoom, does it have to be recorded? Or if it's recorded, is it now part of the record and must be kept for 10 years?
So there's no requirement to keep it for 10 years. It would be 7 if you're talking about the meeting minutes. And most HOA records are 7 years. The classes that, I'm sorry, I got a text and that interrupted me. So if we're talking about Zoom meetings, if it doesn't have to be recorded is the answer to the first question. Okay, there's no requirement that you record a meeting. Just like if you were to have a meeting in a meeting room, you wouldn't have to record it. The members can record that meeting according to Florida law, but there's no obligation. If the meeting is recorded, then until that set of meeting minutes is adopted, that meeting is an official record of the association under Florida law. Once those meeting minutes go into the official records, they replace the recording and it can be deleted if the association wants to. But keep in mind, another thing that probably wasn't thought about by the person asking this question and by most people in Florida, including some attorneys, is that you now need to have in an HOA a records retention policy adopted effective July 1st. So you're already out of time. Congratulations. But that records retention policy should, in my opinion, outline that if you are recording meetings, that meeting recording can be deleted as soon as the meeting minutes are adopted. So it's not a record of the meeting forever. It's a record of the meeting until you adopt those meeting minutes, and then you can destroy it to the extent you want to. And when I say it, I mean you can destroy the recording of the meeting itself, because the minutes replace that recording by saying exactly what was voted upon.
Somebody just backed up what you said. They said they did, in fact, read directly from the slideshow, just as you said. It was not helpful in the way we needed to be. Exactly
Well,
what you said.
And I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't attend, so I absolutely understand. My suggestion is attend our board certification. I know it's another 4 hours, but the bottom line is you'll get more of an education based on what I'm hearing by attending ours or someone else's than DBPR, frankly, in many instances is allowed to provide. It's not their fault. I don't think they're doing anything wrong the way that they're doing it, but ours tend to be more lively, interesting, and educational rather than just reciting the material.
Let's go to your schedule for September.
Okay. We've got on the 5th, the Educate to Elevate in Miami. And I'm guessing Mike Bender will be doing that one. September 9th, Empowering Residents, Condo and HOA Town Hall in Broward County. That's going to be live in person in Tamarack. Mike Bender is going to be doing that one as well. September 10th, Covenant Enforcement for HOAs and Condos. That's my webinar. I believe that one's going to be with GRS Management, so it'll be fun. And then September 11th, we've got a Community Association Professionals Roundtable. And then we've got a bunch of events. We've got the board certification I mentioned, which unfortunately is full. Another Jumping into the Present, Your Governing Documents webinar with Kirsten from our Tampa office on the 20th. A legal update webinar with Campbell Property Management on the 23rd. That's going to be regarding last year's changes. I have one the next day. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. That's going to be 1 hour each for condo and HOA on the 23rd and 24th. And then we've got, of course, several Ask the Experts shows, which will be the most important and perhaps the most enjoyable and informative, other than the ones that I'm part of. Don't tell my partners I said that.
Alan, I've actually been to some of the Ask the Expert shows. And what's so amazing is they might have started off to be about an hour, maybe hour and a half. People bring their questions, and then all of a sudden they've developed 3 or 4 more questions, and it takes a couple hours.
Yeah, that's what tends to happen when we schedule for, let's say if it's in person, so at a trade show or something like that, and we've scheduled for an hour for a class, chances are I'll be answering questions outside the room for the next half hour to an hour.
It's amazing.
For the exact reason you mentioned. It's not questions that they had before they walked in.
Right.
It's questions that pop up during the seminar that, frankly, I don't have the time to go through every little thing during that seminar. I want to make sure you get as much information as possible. But I do tend to stick around for questions. Along with that education, I do routinely answer questions for community managers, clients, potential clients. There's a limitation on what I can do for someone that's not a client of the firm. But if it's just hey, what does the statute say? Usually I'm able to answer those. Kind of like we're doing here today.
Yes. Hey, we're going to go to break, give Alan a chance to rest his voice for a minute. And when we come back, we've got so many more questions. Give everybody the phone number, how they can reach the office, Alan.
So we can be reached at 1-800-974-0680. That'll reach our front desk, which in turn will reach literally anyone in the entire firm.
Okay, we're going to go to break. When we come back, we'll have more with Ask the Experts. We have board certified Alan Swartzside with us today. We'll be right back.
K. Bender Rembaum is a full-service community association law firm dedicated to the representation of community associations throughout Florida. On kbrlegal.com, you can learn more about their offices in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, Orlando, Tampa, as well as throughout Miami-Dade by appointment. Several K. Bender Rembaum attorneys are board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law and assist clients with all matters of community association legal issues while keeping them up to date on new developments that affect their associations. K. Bender Rembaum is also a well-known provider of free legal education for managers and board members. Contact K. Bender Rembaum today by calling 800-974-0680. That's 800-974-0680 to reach any of their locations. You can also visit them online at kbrlegal.com or write to them at info@kbrlegal.com.
And we are back with the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV with your hosts, Steve-O, Sophia, and their expert guests.
Back. This is the Ask the Expert show. I'm your host, Steve-O. We get a lot of letters, people wanting to know, because we do 3 shows a month with K. Bender Rimbaum. We do the Tampa show. It's the last Tuesday of the month at 5 o'clock. We do the show we're doing right now, last Thursday of the month at 5 o'clock. And then we do the South Florida show, which is always the first Thursday of the month at 5 o'clock. So 3 50-minute long shows, and people love this show. They've been with us for about 10 years now. And I wanted to ask you this, Alan. Do you think the state's new rules and regulations are designed to drive HOA and condominiums to a professional management group?
I think it's partially that and partially just an attempt to stop HOAs from having any control of what happens within the community. I mean, if you look at what's been going on, I don't want to overstep, so I'll say it this way. We've got several incidents that have been reported very wildly and perhaps accurately in the news over the last few years. You've got the Surfside building collapse, the hammocks, fund debacle, and several others. A lot of them down in South Florida, which is where we're based and where I started my career. But I think the legislature is looking at their constituents and assuming that what the people want is to not just hold the HOA and condo directors accountable, but make it a criminal act to do anything wrong on the board. I just think that the legislature is looking at 1 to 5% of what's going on in the state, and that's what they're choosing to regulate, instead of, maybe fixing the insurance industry or doing things that will actually benefit all of their constituents far more than restricting HOAs and condos from doing things they were already prohibited from doing. So I think it's more of trying to get HOA laws in line with condo, even though to some extent that doesn't really make sense. And 2, push HOAs and condos to have less and less power and be more and more regulated by the government. Condos have always been highly government regulated because they're creatures of statute. Without legislation saying a condo exists, it wouldn't in Florida. But the level of regulation over contracts that have existed since, in some instances, the 1960s and 70s, when some of these HOAs were created, I have a really big problem with what the legislature's doing. And I've become more vocal over the last year or two, because especially this year, the amount of things that they've now suddenly criminalized that there were penalties for it. Criminalizing not producing records twice in a year. What? Why? Was there someone on the legislature maybe that didn't get the records they were asking for, so now all of a sudden it's a crime not to produce them in time? There's a lot that's going on that's just absolutely not necessary in my opinion. And this is a lot of editorialization. It's not necessarily the position of the firm or any other attorneys within the firm, but this is my perspective in seeing what's going on over the last few years, is that the legislature is just going on the attack every single year and not really caring how it impacts the HOAs. But when you look at how it's, you asked the question earlier just today, well, what do I tell someone that's blaming the board for these increases? The reality is, blame your legislator for not fighting some of this legislation, because they're the ones telling the association they need to do this stuff. So I think it's a concerted attack on HOA and condo governance to take control over all of the communities in Florida, even though there are problems that are worth legislating, is the way that I'll put it, in maybe 1 to 5% of all those communities.
We got a letter from Lily in Orlando, but we've got 3 or 4 letters like this, Alan. It says, I understand there are many developers trying to buy out owners. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, that's something that's been happening since 2008. And matter of fact, in 2008, there was a statute created specifically to address that issue, the bulk buyer statute in condos. Now, this is happening in HOAs and condos. And what's happening is, because of the increases in assessments throughout the state, throughout HOA and condo, people can't afford to live where they're living. So there are people that are investing in, bulk purchases of 20, 30, 40% of all the units in a condo or lots in an HOA. And they're basically redeveloping that community, either by trying to buy up enough units to terminate, or buying up a whole bunch of them and basically turning the community into an apartment complex. Sometimes it's actually a good situation for all these units and HOA lots to be bought up, because the people actually will pay the assessments to avoid getting foreclosed. Whereas someone that's in that unit now might not be able to afford those assessments. You've got a huge investment fund that comes in, and they've got the money, they'll pay. But, pardon me, they might also try and get their block to run the entire board and make the decisions for the community. So it can be really good for the corporation. It's not always good for the individuals who still live in the community. And then gradually what these groups will start to do is buy up more and more lots, more and more units. So again, it's something that's been prevalent since I've been practicing law. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just something that happens, but it does definitely happen, not frequently, but especially with distressed condos that can then be terminated and turned into apartment complexes. Or just, again, there are some groups that just take control. And, sometimes it's great because the people that were running the board, like you mentioned earlier, they're not professional managers. They don't necessarily know what they're doing unless they come from an accounting or business background. So these people are investors who do this on a daily basis, and they fill the board with people that actually know what they're doing and know how to run a business, which is exactly what you're doing if you're on the board. So again, it's not a good or bad. It just depends on the case by case basis analysis of what do these people want to accomplish with this particular condo, this particular HOA.
Some of the concerns in these letters were that they feel like these developers are starting to come in and they're lowballing them.
Yeah, that definitely happens. The lowball offers are based on what they're willing to pay. You don't have to accept it. I mean, that's reality. Until it gets to a point where they're able to terminate without your vote making a difference, meaning, generally in a condo, you've got potentially 100%, but usually 95% of the members voting in favor of termination. And even then, you get a fair market value dollar figure for your unit. So if you're sitting there and saying, well, they're undercutting me, okay, don't sell. But also don't be surprised when those people start to increase the assessments. And it's not only because they want to increase the assessments and push you out. Sometimes it's because the previous board was underfunding everything that needs to be done to keep the community safe and whole. So again, case by case analysis. I know some people that do this for a living that actually rehab and clean up their communities, and some people that are just trying to get everyone else out so that they can sell it and convert it. So it just depends on who you're dealing with and the specific community.
Clark in Orlando, boy, this is the first time we've ever gotten a question like this. He said, what is the definition of a condominium?
I mean, it's a statutory definition. I can look it up, but it's basically my definition, which is not the statutory definition, is it's a piece of real property that is owned by someone or a corporation that doesn't need to be a separate parcel, a separate lot, a separate plot of land. So a condo customarily, you've got land condos where you're just treating it as a condo, even though it's set up like an HOA. You can have, a 4-unit building in a condo that's got just basically townhouse style, or you can have what most people envision as a condo, which is not necessarily a high rise, but a taller building that's broken down into individual units on each floor. Think of an apartment complex, but treated as a separate form of ownership. That's really what most people would envision as a condo. So, I can pull up the statutory definition and read it to you, but you can also look in Chapter 718. It's probably very early in the statute. Section 10 something is my guess.
Okay. I should have asked you this with the other question. They want to know, can they terminate our ownership even at a rate we don't like? Can they still terminate?
At a rate you don't like, yes. At something that's not market value, no. The statute says that if there's a termination, you need to get fair market value for your unit. Now, you may not agree with what your unit's worth, but usually that's going to come with an appraisal, and that appraiser is going to tell you what it's worth. If you don't like that value, fight it in court.
Charlie in Sanford, assessing public record, if not online, can management charge me to make copies? Can I make my own copies so they don't charge me?
You can make your own copies, but you can't take the records outside of the room that they're in. So if there's a copy machine within the room that lets you put in quarters or a credit card, yeah, you can use that yourself. Alternatively, you can bring a camera, a cell phone, or a digital scanner with you and scan the records. They can't charge you for that. But if you're asking the association to make copies, or you are trying to take the records outside of the room that they're being stored in, yeah, they can charge to make copies. I think it's up to 25 is free, and anything beyond that, the association can charge for. And when I say 25, I mean 25, 8.5 by 11 pages.
Okay. I am thinking, this is from Cecil in Kissimmee. He wants to know, I'm thinking about running for the board. What is the biggest problems board members make? Probably biggest mistakes.
Yeah, the biggest mistake is not understanding that you are running a business and making emotional decisions instead of running a business. Most of the other mistakes that I see association directors making stem from that. Is the not distinguishing between your role as a member of the community, someone who lives there, owns property there, etc., is a neighbor of the people that you're dealing with, versus your responsibilities, your fiduciary duty as a board member to do what's in the best interest of the corporation. So when I see people, I had the discussion with someone that just this morning that they didn't want to go ahead and foreclose on a property that hadn't paid the assessments in 3 years. Okay, well, I can understand not wanting to, and people say, I don't want to take someone's house. You're not taking their house. You're exercising a legal remedy. And if they choose not to pay you or settle with you before a foreclosure sale occurs, you might end up with their house, or someone else might pay. They might end up with the house, and you might get paid in full instead of sitting with this person having another 5 years of non-payment on the books. So that's really the biggest problem I see, is taking the emotion or not taking the emotion out of the decisions you make as a director and saying, I want to do what's best for this neighbor instead of I want to do what's best for the community. What's best for the community will almost always be enforcing all of the restrictions that are in your governing documents.
Julian St. Pete, many property managers are realtors. Is it a conflict of interest for a property manager to be an agent that the building sells or does rentals?
They need to disclose that under the new statute if the contract's going to be more than $2,500, and usually a real estate sales contract will be more than $2,500. But I don't see an inherent conflict of interest there unless and until they're actually in the process of approving the purchaser or approving the sale itself. At that point, that might be a conflict of interest. but just the fact that they happen to work in the building generally is not problematic. I have someone that's on the board of one of my HOAs. She's also a realtor. I don't see that as a problem. The fact that she's selling lots in the community, as long as she's not involved in the process of the association deciding whether to allow that sale or not,
right,
not a problem. And frankly, in some condos and HOAs, the board doesn't even have the authority to approve or reject a sale. So especially if in your community, the board doesn't have the ability to say, no, you can't sell this property to this person, where would the conflict be? It's just someone who happens to also work in the community. Now, the other conflict could be the fact that the manager is spending time that they're supposed to be doing the management of the community, and they're spending it on real estate sales instead. That's a different problem, but it's not the conflict of interest that you would normally think of.
Jerry wants to know, we have a small HOA, and I find it a problem to get a board of 4 people. How can we get more people involved to join the board?
Well, step one in a small HOA, limit it to 3 people, and then you don't have to keep looking for the 4th.
Okay.
But bottom line, if you are trying to get people involved, explain what happens when you have to get a receiver involved, because this is the only person on the board. They're making all the decisions, and they want to make sure they can actually attain a quorum of the directors at a board meeting, which you can't do unless you've got at least 2 on a 3-member or 4-member board. Usually your quorum is going to be a majority of directors. I've seen and frankly personally made the argument before that if you only have 1 director, then a quorum is that person. But I've also seen people arguing in the other direction. And if you can't do business as an association and you need to have a receiver appointed to find new directors or to operate the community until you find new directors, that's basically you're paying a property manager, but at an attorney's hourly rate, because it's usually an attorney that serves as the receiver. So if you want to pay over $300 an hour for every little thing your community needs to accomplish, have at it. Maybe I should get into that business. But that would be, I think, the biggest incentive is we need, not I want more people to get involved, but we need more people to get involved potentially to even be able to conduct the business of the association at this point.
Alan, we got a little over a minute left. I haven't asked this for a while. Why should I, as a community, retain K. Bender Rimbaum?
Well, you get me. Come on. But realistically, we've got a 1 business day turnaround time to confirm, hey, we've got your project. Either here's the answer or we're working on it. I'm hearing that other firms are giving 2 to 3 weeks before they even acknowledge that a project came in. It's just not something you're going to deal with here. We've also got more knowledgeable people than a lot of other firms. Like I said, we've got, I think, 10 attorneys who are board certified either in community association law or construction law. And I know that all firms say they're full service, but realistically, there's nothing that I've seen a community association come up against that we can't or haven't handled in the past. When it comes to working with the Orlando office, you're also getting the benefit of Robert K's knowledge, because we do an internal peer review on most or all projects. So you're getting a 40-year attorney's experience in exchange for my hourly rate. And I know that some others offer that, but usually they're charging the $450 an hour, $500 an hour that 40+ year attorney is going to be charging. Robert generally doesn't. I can't promise that, but he doesn't generally charge for that peer review process. So, these are all benefits you get working with the firm. I know that you've pointed out several others in the past. I'm not the guy that's going to sit and jump on my soapbox for 45 minutes about how great the firm is, but I do think we're pretty great, and I love being with these guys.
We think you're pretty great too. Let's give everybody the phone number and the website, because you got great articles on the website.
Yeah, there's a ton of free information and past recordings available. You can't do them for credit, but if you go to KBR Legal, K. Bender Rembaum, kbrlegal.com under the resources tab, that's where you'll find all those things. Under the calendar tab is where you'll find our upcoming classes. You can call us at 1-800-974-0680. And the easiest way to reach me personally is to email at as in Schwartzide at kbrlegal.com. So again, Steve, as always, thank you, my man. It's been a pleasure.
I love doing the show with you. It goes by so fast. Alan will be back again with us next month, the last Thursday of the month at 5 o'clock. Alan, enjoy the holiday.
Thank you. Likewise, Steve. And thanks everyone for watching us and listening today.
Thank you. That's attorney, board certified attorney, Alan Swartseed. That's it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts. Thank you, Juan. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.